All right, welcome. Today we're diving into a really interesting new system for tackling identity-based hate. It's called the Harm-Based Antisemitism Governance Framework, or HAGF for short, and it's designed to solve a problem that has, frankly, tied institutions in knots for decades.
And it all boils down to this one central question. How can you protect people from very real harm while also protecting our most essential rights, like free speech and the right to protest? It's an incredibly delicate balance, and this HAGF framework proposes a whole new way to get it right.
Because let's be honest, the way things are now often fails in two different ways, at the exact same time. On one hand, real threats and violence against Jewish communities don't get the serious attention they deserve, and on the other, perfectly lawful political speech often gets mislabeled as hate. So what's the result? Well, neither safety nor free speech ends up being properly protected.
So why does this keep happening? Well, the architects of this framework argue that it all stems from something they call a conceptual blur. Basically, a fundamental confusion in how we define antisemitism and, maybe more importantly, how we apply those definitions in the real world.
So what is this conceptual blur? Okay, imagine you tried to measure how tall you are using a bathroom scale. It's just the wrong tool for the job, right? Well, that's what's happening here. We're taking definitions that were designed for collecting data, and we're improperly using them to punish speech. And when you do that, you get inconsistent decisions, and you completely erode public trust.
So, to fix this mess, the HAGF brings something totally new to the table, and this is key. It's not just another definition to argue about. Nope, it's a complete governance system, designed from the ground up to be fair, clear, and predictable.
And that phrase, governance architecture, is really the whole idea. Think of it like a blueprint for a building. It gives you a clear, structured system with rules, with tests, with safeguards so that every single time a decision is made, it's predictable and it respects everyone's rights.
So how does it pull this off? Well, as you can see, the framework has a few key innovations. It shifts the entire focus onto actual tangible harm and people's conduct. It separates all the different definitions and examples into a layered stack so they can't be misused. It brings in a transparent test for making decisions, and, critically, it prioritizes the worst harms while explicitly building in protections for free speech. It's a really systematic approach.
Okay, let's get into the first big mechanical piece here, the definition stack. This is the core engine of the framework, and it's specifically designed to get rid of that conceptual blur by making sure the right tool is always used for the right job. So the stack has three very distinct layers, and each one has a very specific function. It starts with layer A, a core, binding legal definition. Then you have layer B, which is non-binding guidance that gives context. And finally, layer C has examples that are only for education. This whole structure is a firewall to prevent misuse.
Now just look at the precision of layer A. This is the core definition, and it is the only part of this entire framework that can be used for any kind of disciplinary action. Notice how it's focused completely on conduct, on what people do, not on what their political beliefs might be. Layers B and C, they're really important for providing context and helpful educational examples. They pull from all sorts of sources to help decision makers understand the nuances. But, and this is the critical rule, they are both strictly non-binding. They can inform a decision, sure, but they can never be the basis for the decision itself.
And that's really what makes the whole system click. If an institution makes a formal decision based on, say, one of the educational examples in layer C instead of the core harm-based definition in layer A, well, the framework calls that a governance error. And that mistake makes the entire decision invalid.
So once we have the right definitions locked in place with the stack, how do we actually apply them? Well, HAGF provides a really clear set of tests to assess conduct, and the whole point is to focus on tangible harm, not on the political content of someone's speech. It does this with something called the 4T decision test. Think of it as a mandatory checklist for any investigation. It forces decision makers to walk through 4 key questions: target, trope, treatment, and threat. By making them assess all 4, it helps ensure decisions are consistent and based on actual evidence, not just a gut feeling.
Okay, so once you've assessed the harm, what do you do about it? The response is guided by this, the enforcement pyramid. It's a simple, brilliant way to make sure the punishment fits the crime. Up at Tier 1, you've got direct threats and violence. That gets the most urgent response. But way down at the bottom, at Tier 4, you have things like offensive speech, which is only met with education.
never with punishment. And this slide really shows that principle of proportionality in action. A Tier 1 threat, that triggers immediate protection and likely involves law enforcement. But a Tier 4 expression, something that causes offense but no actual harm, the only response allowed is education and dialogue. Disciplinary action is explicitly forbidden.
So all of these mechanics we've talked about, the stack, the tests, the pyramid, they aren't just random rules. They're all built on a core philosophy that safety and freedom aren't enemies, they're not competing goals. In fact, they can and should reinforce each other.
A really important principle here is something called symmetry. The framework insists that the rules for handling anti-Semitism have to be structurally the same as the rules for other forms of racism. As you can see here, the core logic, identity targeting plus actual harm, has to be comparable across the board. This is all about ensuring fairness and building trust between different communities. And get this, the framework also has a binding protected expression clause. It basically builds a firewall around core democratic activities, things like protest, academic debate, journalism. This kind of speech only loses its protection if it crosses that very clear line into identity-targeted harm as defined by Layer A and confirmed by that 40 test.
This right here, this gets to the absolute heart of the framework's mission. The #1 job of an institution is to protect people from harm. It is not to shield governments or political movements from criticism. You could say the whole goal is to protect people, not power.
So in the end, the whole framework is built on this one powerful, optimistic belief. You don't have to choose. Protecting Jewish communities from real harm and protecting our democratic freedoms are not competing goals. They can and they absolutely must reinforce each other.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Could this focus on governance architecture, on clear rules, transparent tests, and a harm-based approach be a blueprint for protecting safety and speech, not just for one group, but for everyone? It's a pretty powerful idea. Thanks for tuning in.